Good Sunday. This is about 11:40 a.m. on Sunday, October the 2nd, and Steelers will be playing the Texans in just about an hour and a half, but I'm trying to get some schoolwork done before the game. I wanted to comment on your discussion board for Suisse and Fars in the Land of the Free. Overall, you get the idea. Um, I'm going to be pretty generous with points this week just because I know that there's so much going on, but I want to encourage you again to try not to repeat ideas too much. Um, there was a little bit of repetition, but overall, I felt like people tried to put their own twist on it or find some lines from the story that would illustrate a point in a way that it hadn't been illustrated before. But there was a little repetition, so try to be fresh if you can. I like that Melissa brought out the Chinese Exclusion Act. I think this is an important element to understand or context that was happening in America at the time. And as Brett and others pointed out, this is a complex issue, this whole idea. Of course, initially America was the land of immigrants. I mean, we are a land of immigrants. People came here from other places for an opportunity and a new life or for religious freedom or whatever. And we still have issues with immigration. What do we do with the border at Texas with Mexico and illegal aliens and things like that? And I know people sometimes feel strong emotions about that. Um, and at the same time, you might feel that way about this story. So I like that Melissa brought about attention to the Chinese Exclusion Act, which basically try to keep Chinese immigrants out of the country or to keep their rights kind of at a minimum or to detain them as much as possible. Chinese immigrants were basically the ones who did all the really difficult work of laying a lot of that transcontinental railroad. And once the transcontinental railroad was completed, it seemed we didn't have too much use anymore for this group of people coming in. So that's kind of the history behind that. Melissa brought out that point, and but also wanted to try to give credit to Clancy, the attorney, for having all this red tape to go through. So at least he did that. And I think overall in the story, you're supposed to look at the laws as somewhat callous, and the attorney as pretty much opportunist. I think that's how you're supposed to look at it. I think you can make an argument, you know, uh, against that, which Melissa tried to give a little credit to Clancy, and Cindy kind of argued pretty well that it seemed clear what Clancy's true motivation was. So that was an interesting thread, one of the first ones between Melissa and Cindy. Um, Another thing I'd like to talk about is the law itself, because morals and laws are two different things. Justice can be different from the law. These are kind of complex concepts, but it harkens back. I think about Martin Luther King. When there are laws that are unjust, is it your duty to still follow them, or is it really more your duty to break them? Because Martin Luther King, saw these Jim Crow laws as unjust and these laws surrounding segregation as unjust. And in hindsight, we look back and we look at it that way. But when you're embroiled in it at the time, maybe it's not quite so clear. And so Mary Hutchins, I liked her thread that talked about the law reigned over justice, just like the men reigned over the women in the story. And in this story, Lei Chu is supposed to be sort of the moral compass. She is the one by which we should probably are probably supposed to gauge our reaction. And certainly, as some of you noted, it doesn't really seem right to take a child from a mother for that long. Um, but as others noted, there were laws, and the child didn't have papers. So this is kind of interesting. But I liked Mary's post because it reminded me about, what if the law is unjust? Then what is your obligation, and who are we to say when a law is unjust? But that's why we have different protests and movements, and how law continually evolves and changes as we come to a greater understanding. Last thing I wanted to talk about was the end of the story. Some of you commented that it was ironic that the baby didn't really know his mother anymore. I don't know that it was ironic. Wouldn't one expect, if you take an infant away from a certain environment and put him in another environment, he would assimilate pretty quickly to that environment. So I'm not 100% sure if it was ironic. I think it was just compounded disappointment for the mother who had grieved and waited and given up everything to get her child back, only to have the child not really recognize her and not really um, uh, be the same kind of child. He's assimilated. I think it's more symbolic than anything, is this sort of forced assimilation into white culture where he has a different name and he talks a different way. Go away, go away. Um, in the story, I don't know if you noticed, but when the Chinese characters are thinking or speaking in Chinese, the um, the language is very sort of formal and poetic. And when the Chinese characters are speaking in English, it's broken and not quite as clear and not nearly as pleasing to the ear. I think this was a rather clever technique that also maybe commented a little bit on that double consciousness that y'all are reading about in W.E.B. Du Bois's work, Souls of Black Folks. That double consciousness, again, is like you're seeing yourself through the eyes of the dominant culture who see you a certain way. That's a pretty deep concept and a difficult concept. Sometimes, don't want to be known as the black poet, just want to be known as a poet. But with that double consciousness, then you're always sort of seeing yourself through the dominant culture's eyes and how they see you. So I think you have some of that definitely going on in this story, and it was cleverly depicted, not only through the plot, but through the use of dialogue and dialect. So other than that, I will say one last thing, that Brett's thread, pretty long and detailed, is very good. It's quite accurate and eloquent and well written. For a very short and succinct version of that, look at Rondell's thread. It was very succinct and short, but he stated it quite well. And I also like Trisha's post this week. I thought Trisha, it was one of the last ones, and it might not have gotten as read as much as some of the others, but take a look at Trisha's as well. So as you get ready for TWIS 1, you definitely want to review this particular discussion board, and I hope that this review this week helped. Go Steelers.